On June 20, 2023, Robert Cantrell, a 62-year-old resident of Jacksonville, Florida, stepped off his flight at the Cancun International Airport. Cantrell, known for his adventurous spirit and love for real estate, had come to Cancun with a purpose. He was supposed to meet a real estate agent to check out some properties he was interested in purchasing. This trip, however, would take a dark and mysterious turn. Cantrell's trip to Cancun had been unusual from the start. He had initially traveled to Los Angeles to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Kol Ami Synagogue. From there, he was scheduled to fly to Cancun on June 18th. Unfortunately, he missed that flight, resulting in a series of missteps that took him off course to Charlotte, North Carolina, and then Austin, Texas, before finally reaching Cancun on June 20th. Despite the chaotic travel path, U.S. consular officials confirmed that Cantrell did indeed arrive in Cancun as planned. Upon landing, Cantrell made a hurried and panicked phone call to his ex-wife, reporting that his belongings had been stolen and he needed to return to Jacksonville. This was the last time anyone from his family heard his voice. His daughter, Lauren Cantrell, soon found herself at the center of a disturbing mystery. Just days later, on June 29th, a video surfaced on Facebook showing a disoriented Robert Cantrell. He was shirtless, shoeless, and babbling incoherently in English. His eyes were wild, and he appeared to have lesions on his body. The video, recorded by a local news reporter named Israel Vega, depicted Cantrell getting into an ambulance. Vega mentioned that Cantrell had been assaulted by a hotel security guard and was being taken to the U.S. Embassy. He called the ambulance to get treatment for Cantrell's dehydration and injuries, but since he had no money or IDs, he was turned over to the consulate. However, this transfer never happened. The sight of her father in such a state sent chills down Lauren's spine. She immediately filed a missing persons report with the Los Angeles Police Department, hired a private investigator, and enlisted the help of Texas EquuSearch, a search and recovery nonprofit. Lauren's determination to find her father led her to Cancun. Bringing flyers and guided by a local man who served as her translator, she posted missing person flyers throughout the city. Despite her efforts, the mystery of Robert Cantrell's whereabouts deepened. Many locals reported seeing him, but no concrete leads emerged. As the days passed, the case grew colder. The Quintana Roo Attorney General's office issued a missing person bulletin, and Lauren provided a DNA sample to aid in the investigation. The family's frustration and fear grew with each passing day. Lauren and her family struggled to balance hope and despair, searching tirelessly while grappling with the harsh reality of their situation. The GoFundMe campaign they had started to support the search efforts provided some financial relief, but could not ease the emotional burden. Lauren's heartfelt message on social media expressed the family's exhaustion and grief. She decided to step back from actively providing updates or engaging in the search process. In her message, Lauren painted a vivid picture of the emotional toll the search had taken on her family. Despite stepping back, Lauren remained a point of contact for authorities and promised to share any relevant updates. Friends and local supporters continued to distribute flyers and respond to potential sightings. The hope for Robert Cantrell's safe return lingered, though the reality of the situation grew increasingly grim. In late April 2024, brothers Jake Robinson, 30, and Callum Robinson, 33, along with their friend Jack Carter Road, 30, went on a surfing trip to Baja California, Mexico. They were excited about this trip, but it turned tragic. Jake and Callum, originally from Australia, had different paths. Callum lived in San Diego, pursuing a professional lacrosse career and working in the tech industry, while Jake, a doctor, was about to start a new job back in Australia. Their friend Jack, an American, lived in San Diego and was engaged to Natalie Wirtz, with their wedding planned for August 17th in Columbus, Ohio. The three were last seen on April 27th, surfing and camping near Ensenada. They had planned to stay in Rosarito but never arrived. Concern grew when Deborah Robinson, Jake and Callum's mother, posted on Facebook about not hearing from them since April 27th. On May 3rd, their bodies were found at the bottom of a 50-foot well in Santo Tomas, Baja California, all with gunshot wounds. The discovery was a shock to their families and friends who had been hoping for their safe return. Authorities believe the men were killed in a robbery gone wrong. Baja California's chief state prosecutor, Maria Elena Andrade Ramirez, said the robbers likely wanted the tires from their truck. When the trio resisted, they were killed. A burned-out white pickup truck, identified as Callum's from an Instagram post, was found at a ranch in Santo Tomas, 40 miles from where the bodies were discovered. 3 Mexican citizens were arrested for kidnapping in connection with the case. One suspect, Jesus Gerardo El Quecas, had a criminal history, including drug dealing, domestic violence, and vehicle theft. The suspects are thought to have seen the surfers' tents and truck, decided to steal the tires, and killed the men when they resisted. They then moved the bodies about 4 miles to the well, covered it with boards, and tried to burn the campsite. Jake, Callum, and Jack had promising futures. Jack was preparing for his wedding, Jake was about to start a new job, and Callum was focusing on his future beyond sports. Their deaths left a deep impact on their families, friends, and communities. Following the murders, a GoFundMe page was created by Aubrey Byers, a close friend of Jack and Natalie, to support Natalie and honor Jack by raising money for scholarships and donations. It quickly raised over $50,000. The surfing community in Ensenada and beyond was also affected. About 500 people marched for justice and better security, demanding safer beaches for surfing and camping. A paddle-out ceremony was held in their honor, with surfers forming a circle on their boards and throwing flowers into the sea. This tragic event highlights the violence in Baja California, a region troubled by drug cartels and crime, though such violence rarely affects tourists. The Baja California Attorney General's office has promised to continue the investigation until those responsible are fully prosecuted. Despite the arrests, many questions remain. The former director of the Ensenada Police Department, Jesus Luna Lezama, suggested the crime had the hallmarks of organized crime rather than a random robbery, noting that such violent crimes are uncommon among thieves who usually avoid drawing attention. On February 16, 2024, John Gamboa boarded his flight to Mexico City. The day was sunny and warm in Houston, where John lived with his mother, Fermina. 30-year-old John was a U.S. Air Force veteran, having served for 5 years. He was no stranger to travel and adventure, and this trip was supposed to be a simple, quick one. He planned to retrieve his belongings from Mexico City, where he had been based the previous year, and return home by February 18th. But John never made it back. On the morning of February 16th, John had called his mother to let her know he was about to board his flight. Fermina wished him a safe trip and reminded him to call her when he landed. However, that call never came. Instead, Fermina received a troubling notification from USAA Bank later that day. Someone was attempting to access John's bank account. Concerned, she tried to reach him multiple times, but there was no response. The last confirmed sighting of John was in the early hours of February 17th. He was seen hailing a taxi outside Montana Disco in Mexico City. According to witnesses, he was wearing a maroon shirt and tan pants. He also had a tattoo of Jesus on his chest and an infinity symbol on his index finger. After that, John seemed to vanish without a trace. As February 18th came and went without any word from John, Fermina's anxiety grew. She contacted his employer, who confirmed that John had not logged in for work. This was completely out of character for him. Fermina reached out to friends and acquaintances in Mexico City, but no one had seen or heard from John. Desperation set in as she realized her son was truly missing. Fermina reported John's disappearance to the FBI, who quickly issued a missing person bulletin. They stated that John was last seen on February 17th, wearing a maroon shirt and tan pants. They also noted his distinctive tattoos. The Department of State acknowledged the situation, stating they were aware of the reports and ready to provide assistance. However, there was little they could do directly, as the investigation was in Mexico's jurisdiction. Fermina, meanwhile, was relentless in her search for answers. She contacted multiple state and government agencies, but felt frustrated by the lack of immediate response. Despite the obstacles, she refused to give up hope. John had always been a dedicated son. When Fermina had cancer, he had given her a double bone marrow transplant. "He made sacrifices just to extend my life," Fermina said, her voice breaking. This made his disappearance even more heartbreaking for the family. They couldn't understand how someone who had given so much could simply disappear. As days turned into weeks, the investigation continued, but leads were scarce. Retired FBI agent Jim Conway explained that while the FBI couldn't conduct investigations in Mexico, they could use liaisons to communicate with Mexican authorities. Despite these efforts, the family received little new information. The disappearance remained shrouded in mystery. John's friends in Mexico City confirmed that he had arrived on the night of February 16th and had taken an Uber to his Airbnb. Photos provided by a friend showed John's belongings left behind in the room. At around 11:30 p.m., he had gone to Montana Disco and Bar alone. This was his last known location. Fermina's anguish grew with each passing day. She issued a heartfelt plea through ABC 13 saying, "I am just saying that whoever holds my son, please let him go." She repeated, "Money can be replaced, but life cannot. We only have one life." Her words resonated with many as the community rallied around the family, hoping for John's safe return. The situation took a slightly hopeful turn when U.S. Representative Lizzie Fletcher's office became involved. They reached out to Fermina, promising to monitor the situation and assist in any way possible. Security services in Mexico City were also engaged in the search. Conway noted that Mexico City's security services were relatively sophisticated and had a good working relationship with the U.S. But as the days continued to pass, hope began to wane. Fermina's strength was tested as she continued to fight for her son's return. She reached out to news outlets, government officials, and anyone who might be able to help. The family's Filipino community also showed support, sharing John's story and praying for his safety. On August 28, 2020, at around 10 a.m., 78-year-old Ian Hirschson and 73-year-old Kathy Harvey were last heard from while staying at Ian's vacation home near El Socorrito, Baja California, Mexico. The couple, who had met through online dating a few years earlier, had been enjoying their retirement. Ian, a retired aerospace engineer from South Africa, had owned the vacation home for 35 years. Kathy, a retired physical therapist, was thrilled to be traveling and spending time with Ian. That morning, Kathy texted her son, Robert Harvey, to say they planned to explore a gold mine or visit a beach. They were supposed to return to San Diego on August 31st, but when they didn't, their families reported them missing on September 2nd to the Baja California State Prosecutor's Office. Ian and Kathy were active in the expat community in Baja California. Ian, well known for his personality, frequently windsurfed around the bay south of San Quintin. Kathy loved walking and traveling, with many destinations still on her bucket list. Mexican authorities launched a search around El Socorito and Ensenada. On September 5th, they found the couple's dark blue Toyota Land Cruiser abandoned in a remote area of Ensenada, about 3 hours north of El Socorito. Nearby, they discovered a well containing human remains. The remains were identified as Ian Hirschson and Kathy Harvey. Authorities concluded they had been murdered. Baja California's head prosecutor, Hiram Sanchez, revealed they were killed during a robbery. The suspect, Emmanuel Aguilar, was the son of the landowners of the ranch where Ian had rented his home. Emmanuel, who had a history of drug use, allegedly stabbed Ian and Kathy while they were asleep, then placed their bodies in the Toyota Land Cruiser and drove 4 miles to the well where he disposed of them. Emmanuel Aguilar's arrest brought some relief to the victims' families. Ian's daughter, Ava Setzer, and Kathy's son, Robert Harvey, had been searching for them, sharing information and appealing for help on social media. Ava posted a message on Facebook asking anyone who had seen the couple to contact her. The discovery of the bodies and Emmanuel's arrest provided some closure, but the families remained devastated. Ian Hirschson had a distinguished career and many interests. Born in South Africa, he earned a mechanical engineering degree from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg in 1963. Then moved to the U.S., where he earned 2 master's degrees from Purdue University and Princeton University. He was pursuing a Ph.D. at University of California, San Diego, before founding several successful companies. Ian was also a pilot and enjoyed safaris in South Africa and windsurfing in Baja California. Kathy Harvey, originally from New York, had lived in Tierra Santa, San Diego, for over 30 years before retiring in 2014. She worked as a physical therapist at Sharp Chula Vista Medical Center. In retirement, Kathy enjoyed traveling and walking and had many places she still wanted to visit. She was very happy with Ian. The deaths of Ian and Kathy deeply affected their families and friends. Jim Dietz, Ian's neighbor in Solana Beach, described Ian as a gentleman who never spoke unkindly about anyone. He expressed sympathy for Ian's children, who had already lost their mother a few years earlier. The families appreciated the efforts of the Mexican authorities, particularly the Ensenada Homicide Division, in solving the case. It was April 11, 2016, in Oaxaca, Mexico. Jenny Chen, a 26-year-old Chinese citizen, had been backpacking through the country since March. She was adventurous, passionate about exploring new places, and loved meeting new people. On this day, she was headed out of the city, planning to meet her husband, Jonathan Reinhardt, in Cancun on April 15th. This would be a reunion after her solo travel adventure. But Jenny never made it to Cancun. Jenny was known for her frequent updates on social media. She posted photos regularly, sharing her journey with friends and family. She also made daily calls to her mother, but on April 11th, those updates and calls abruptly stopped. Concerned, Jonathan waited for her in Cancun. When she didn't show up, he knew something was terribly wrong. Jonathan, a Seattle resident, and Jenny had been together for 8 years. They met in China when Jonathan was there for work. Jenny had attended an event called English Corner by a lake, a popular gathering place for Chinese people wanting to practice their English. Jonathan recalled how Jenny had asked him if he liked Kentucky Fried Chicken. They exchanged phone numbers, went on a date, and soon fell in love. They married in 2012, and Jenny moved to the United States in 2013. She was on her path to becoming a U.S. citizen. Back in Cancun, Jonathan's concern grew with each passing hour. He contacted both the U.S. and Chinese embassies in Mexico, but their responses were not encouraging. The U.S. State Department offered little help since Jenny was not yet a U.S. citizen. The Chinese authorities were equally unhelpful. Frustrated, Jonathan took matters into his own hands. He hired a private investigator in Mexico, using funds raised through a GoFundMe campaign. The investigator managed to trace Jenny's movements on April 11th. She had traveled from Oaxaca City to Juchitán, a small town about 6 hours away. In Juchitán, she stayed with a local family and was last seen the following day, April 12th, trying to hitch a ride to Cancun along Highway 185. Eyewitnesses reported seeing Jenny getting into a Corona beer truck around 2 p.m. on April 12th. The driver had stopped on the side of the highway, waved Jenny over, and offered her a ride. This truck was supposed to take a different route to avoid a blockade by teachers, which was happening on the main road to Cancun. However, the truck headed in the opposite direction, a detail that puzzled everyone involved in the search. Jonathan's investigator reached out to Grupo Modelo, the company that owned the Corona truck, but getting any useful information from them proved to be a hard task. For weeks, they did not respond. When they finally did, the information was vague and unhelpful. They confirmed that there were 7 Corona trucks operating in the area on April 12th, but refused to release the names of the drivers or any other details that could help identify the one Jenny had boarded. Desperate for answers, Jonathan launched a social media campaign, urging friends and supporters to put pressure on Grupo Modelo through Facebook and Twitter. He also continued to raise funds through GoFundMe to cover the escalating costs of the private investigation. The situation was emotionally and financially draining. Jonathan had to balance his search efforts with his job and everyday responsibilities. His employer was supportive, but the stress was immense. Despite all these efforts, tangible leads were few and far between. The Mexican authorities were not much help either. While they issued an alert for information on Jenny, their efforts seemed dull. They suggested that Jenny could have taken a more dangerous northerly route through Veracruz State, known for its violence and disappearances, adding another layer of complexity and fear to the already harrowing situation. Jonathan's private investigator continued to dig for clues. The most promising lead remained the Corona truck sighting. Witnesses had clearly seen Jenny getting into the truck, but the trail went cold after that. Jonathan believed that the driver of that truck held the key to finding Jenny. However, Grupo Modelo's reluctance to cooperate fully was a significant roadblock. In a bid to get more information, Jonathan traveled to Mexico multiple times. He hoped to gain more support from the local Chinese Chamber of Commerce in Oaxaca and tried to retrace Jenny's steps himself. He even offered a reward for any information leading to her whereabouts, hoping that it might encourage someone to come forward. By May 24th, nearly 6 weeks after Jenny's disappearance, Grupo Modelo finally agreed to work with Jonathan and the investigators. They scheduled a call with the police, Jonathan, and the private investigator, but the information they provided was still limited, and the names of the drivers remained undisclosed. Jonathan remained determined. He believed that if he could get the names and photos of the Corona truck drivers, they could identify the one Jenny had been with. This person was the last known individual to see Jenny, and Jonathan was convinced they held the answers he desperately needed. Throughout this ordeal, Jonathan's love for Jenny and his hope for her safe return never wavered. He continued to advocate for her, pushing for more action from the authorities and Grupo Modelo. He also kept the public informed through the Facebook group Help Find Jenny, sharing updates and asking for continued support. As the search continues, many questions remain unanswered. What happened to Jenny after she got into the Corona truck? Why was Grupo Modelo so reluctant to provide information? Did the driver have any malicious intent, or was he just offering a ride to a stranded traveler? These questions weigh heavily on Jonathan and everyone involved in the search. Over the years, Patrick's passion for exploring had taken him to many remarkable places. In the summer of 2018, he took his first ever trip outside the Americas, visiting Southeast Asia. But he loved Latin America best. The people, the food, the different cultures tied together by a beautiful language, it all spoke to him. And now he was in Mexico, enjoying a short trip before returning home. How was he to know that he'd meet his untimely and senseless end there? It was October 24, 2018, when Patrick Braxton Andrew left his home in North Carolina and boarded a plane to Mexico. At 34 years old, Patrick was a seasoned traveler. After college, he had spent a couple of years working to earn enough money for an 18-month journey that took him to Mexico and the northern parts of South America. It was then that he found his love for the Spanish language, a subject that he had struggled with throughout his formal education. He learned the language quickly, then went back to his home in Davidson, North Carolina, where he became a part-time Spanish teacher and the owner of a tutoring and mentoring business. And now he was back in Mexico, where he planned to visit the Copper Canyon National Park. Patrick arrived in Urique, a municipality in Mexico's northwestern state of Chihuahua, on either October 26th or October 27th. He checked into a local hotel and set out to explore the area. He only had a couple of days to do so because he was meant to meet his brother in Mexico City on October 30th. Patrick wanted to make the most out of this time. He was excited, despite the fact that the small state of Chihuahua is known to be dangerous due to crime and other drug-related activities. On October 28, 2018, Patrick spoke to his parents at about 2:51 p.m., then left his hotel. He set out on a hike to a spot known as La Playita. The day was beautiful, and so was the country. Everything was perfect. 2 days later in Mexico City, Carrie Braxton Andrew waited for his brother. They were supposed to meet, but Patrick never showed up, and at that point, there had been no communication from him in 2 days. By now, Patrick's family was worried. They contacted the hotel owner and were stunned to find out that Patrick never got back from his hike 2 days before. Patrick's family alerted the authorities. More than 100 Mexican police officers started searching for the 34-year-old man, combing the Copper Canyon region, hoping to find any trace of Patrick. They searched by plane and with the help of drones, but nothing turned up. It was as if the earth had swallowed Patrick up. And then, on November 17th, they found something. A body. Authorities quickly identified it as Patrick Braxton Andrew. His body was discovered about a mile away, leading to the village of Guapalena to Las Lajas, Urique. But how could this be? The area had already been thoroughly searched. It only got more confusing from there. The body had been found on a stony surface in an area with no vegetation. Then how come it was covered in reddish dirt and pine leaves? It only took an educated guess and an autopsy to figure out what had really happened to Patrick Braxton Andrew. He'd been shot in the head, buried somewhere in the mountains, and then dug up and dumped off the road, where police eventually found him. But why? As the investigation continued, the governor of Chihuahua declared that Patrick had been assassinated. Moreover, Chihuahua Attorney General Cesar Peniche Esquivel said that sometime during his hike in La Playita, Patrick encountered members of a Sinaloa cartel drug trafficking cell. It is possible that Patrick was mistaken for being a U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration agent and was killed by either notorious drug trafficker Jose Noriel Portillo Gil, known as El Chueco, or by one of his men. Rumors that Patrick was the victim of a drug deal gone wrong were quickly dismissed by Mexican authorities, who described the man as an innocent victim who suffered the misfortune of crossing paths with El Chueco. The plan was simple. Now that the weather cleared up, they could start their adventure and sail their 41-foot sailing vessel from Mexico to San Diego. Sure, it wasn't going to be an easy trip, but all three of them were experienced sailors, and were confident they could conquer even the tallest waves and the most unforgiving winds. Hopefully, this wouldn't be the case. They were in for an early departure. At that point, there was nothing that would have alerted them about what was to come out there, far from the safety of the shore. It was April 4th, 2023, when Frank O'Brien, his wife Carrie O'Brien, and their friend William Gross set sail from Mazatlan, Mexico. They were beginning their journey to San Diego, California, but first, they needed to stop in Cabo San Lucas and stock up on supplies. The three of them spent the morning of April 4th making calls about the upcoming stop, stating they would arrive 2 days later on April 6th. Frank and Carrie were both licensed boat captains. The couple had hired William Gross to help on their planned 11-day trip. The journey was ambitious but manageable, especially with Gross on board, a man who was said to be able to fix anything and who had over 50 years of experience as a sailor. The three of them combined had almost 100 years of experience. The O'Briens and Gross also had a lot of faith in their boat, which was appropriately called Ocean Bound. Ocean Bound was a 41-foot sailboat, manufactured about 35 years before in Taiwan. Despite its age, the sailboat was trusty. It was crafted from solid fiberglass. It was time-tested. It was no stranger to the whims, the beauty, and the perils of ocean waters. William texted his daughter on that April 4th, letting her know they were setting sail at about 9:30 a.m. 2 days later, several people in Cabo San Lucas waited for Frank, Carrie, and William to make their stop and grab their supplies, as previously discussed. But the hours passed, and there was still no sign of the Ocean Bound. They didn't show up the following day, nor the day after that. Back home in the U.S., Mike Argall, Carrie's brother, was getting worried, and so was Melissa Spicuzza, Willima's daughter. It was so unlike them not to call or text. What if something had happened to them out there, on the ocean? It was time to take action. They alerted the authorities, who immediately started searching for the missing boat. There was no record of them ever making it to Cabo San Lucas, which added to the ominous feeling of the whole thing. To make matters worse, authorities knew that Ocean Bound lacked GPS tracking, and with communication in the area around Baja being notoriously spotty, the search had to be done the old way. The Mexican Navy and U.S. Coast Guard launched a massive search, combing through 200,057 square nautical miles off Mexico's northern Pacific coast, an area larger than the entire state of California. Canada also provided additional assets. They used helicopters, boats, and every piece of technology at their disposal, but there was no sign of the missing vessel, no trace of the three Americans. After spending 281 cumulative hours trying to at least get a lead, the Coast Guard eventually had to make a difficult call. They suspended the search. "Unfortunately, we found no evidence of the three Americans' whereabouts or what might have happened," said Commander Gregory Higgins. Authorities believe it is possible the three had encountered bad weather conditions and 20-foot waves, but what happened to the three Americans is still a mystery. Harry Devert was a true adventurer. He had enough of it for 10 people. He had seen much of the world over the years, and he understood that it could be as dangerous as it was extraordinary. The chipped tooth he got from a gun shoved in his mouth in Venezuela was testimony to this, but nothing quite compared to what he was living now, in Mexico. The military had just escorted him out of a very dangerous area, and he was told another escort was waiting for him in another town. Just as well, as long as he could still make it to Brazil, to the World Cup. He sent his girlfriend a quick text explaining the situation, and then resumed his journey, his motorcycle engine roaring. Harry Devert had no idea what awful fate awaited him. It was January 25, 2014, when Harry Devert sent his last ever text. At 32 years old, Harry was an adventurer through and through, but nothing could have prepared him for the tense situation in Mexico. The New Yorker had just recently traded in a high-flying finance career for the freedom of a transcontinental motorcycle journey. He'd wanted to have one last epic adventure before finally settling down, planning to motorcycle through Mexico and Central America to Brazil in time for the World Cup, and then make his way to Ushuaia, the world's southernmost city. Harry's journey had brought him to Michoacan in Mexico, where the situation seemed out of control. After a gang of civilians had taken action against a key drug cartel the previous month, the Mexican government sent thousands of troops and police to keep the peace. The government then joined forces with the vigilantes in order to overthrow the cartel, The situation was getting tenser and more dangerous by the day, and Mikoakan was now the worst possible place for a tourist. 4 days later, on January 29, 2014, Harry's mother, Anne DeVert, was waiting for her son to call. January 29th was Harry's late father's birthday, and the 32-year-old always, without fail, called his mother on this occasion. When he failed to do this, and given the fact that the last anyone had heard from Harry was 4 days before, Anne got the sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong with her son. That's when she alerted Mexican authorities. She traveled to Mexico, relentlessly seeking answers. For months, Harry's friends and family sifted through tips, reported sightings, and false leads. They spread the word on Facebook pages dedicated to the young adventurer. They never lost hope for a happy outcome. Then July came around and everything changed. 300 miles from Harry DeVert's last known location, Mexican authorities found a motorcycle buried in a shallow grave. The motorcycle was stripped for parts and muddy, but the identification number was still intact. The motorcycle wasn't the only thing in the grave. There were also 2 bags, each containing the badly decomposed remains of a man. Anne DeVert gave a DNA sample to the police to help confirm the identity of the remains, and the results were clear. The remains belonged to her son, Harry DeVert. Authorities now believe Harry DeVert was mistakenly taken for a U.S. drug enforcement agent and killed by Adrian Reyes Cadena, a local gang leader. Cadena, known as El Tigre, was arrested in August 2015. Anne DeVert believes her son was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, an innocent victim to the whims of dangerous and cruel people. It was more than unusual for Wilmer to miss breakfast without letting his friend know. Ever since he came back to Mexico, the man made sure to see his friends each and every weekend. Otherwise, his was a lonely life. His wife had died years ago, and he had only his beloved dog, Bones, to keep him company. So where was he? And why didn't he tell anyone if he was leaving? Wilmer, who was originally from Markleeville, a small town in Northern California near Lake Tahoe, was camping on the Mexican peninsula of Baja California. He was no stranger to the place. Wilmer and his wife had driven to Mexico on trips for 20 years. His wife's death in 2019 briefly stopped his visits to the area, but now he was back. Wilmer lived in his camper with his dog, Bones, in a very remote area of Baja California. As long as he could go have breakfast with some nearby friends a couple of times a week, the man could manage the solitude and the quiet. In fact, he liked this peaceful life, which usually went on without incident. Sure, there was that nasty matter a few months before. Wilmer was driving in his camper when he was involved in a traffic accident with 2 Mexican siblings. The accident sparked a heated confrontation, and Wilmer had to give them 50,000 Mexican pesos, or the then equivalent of $2,723 for damages and injuries to them and the vehicle. After that unpleasant affair, the 80-year-old went on to live on the peninsula. But his not going to breakfast was out of character. His friends were worried. That February 11th, they decided to pay Wilmer Trivet a visit to see if everything was all right with their friend, whom they affectionately called Dino. But once they got there, they were met with a worrisome sight. Bones was all alone sitting on the porch, no sign of Wilmer in sight. Wilmer's friends knew the man never went anywhere without his dog. With a sinking feeling in their guts, they decided to walk down to where they knew Wilmer's motorhome was supposed to be, except that it wasn't there and neither was Wilmer. They alerted the authorities, which in turn let the man's family know about his disappearance. They had no idea where he was either. At first, the search was fruitless. With no evidence and no leads, authorities were at a loss about what to do. But it all changed on February 23rd, when, almost 2 weeks after Wilmer's disappearance, a law enforcement officer found the man's camper. The camper had been burned up, which led authorities to believe there was foul play involved in the case. 2 months later, in April 2023, a trained cadaver dog made a gruesome discovery. Authorities found a decomposing body buried in a shallow grave. It belonged to Wilmer Trivet, but who could have done this? And why? It didn't take long for authorities to circle back to the traffic dispute Wilmer had been involved in some months before. As it turned out, their guess was correct. After the car accident, the 2 Mexican siblings and Wilmer Trivet got into a heated argument. Wilmer paid them and figured the matter was done. But months later, the pair figured the payment wasn't enough. Still enraged, they kidnapped the 80-year-old man and took his life. Juan Hectorin and his sister Jocelyn Guadalupean, whose full names have not been released in accordance with Mexican law, then buried the body in a shallow grave, burned the man's camper, and left, their anger now quenched. Wilmer is lovingly remembered by his friends and family and by his beloved dog, Bones. The weather was worsening. Conditions were adverse, with an extreme reverse tide. Kayaking no longer seemed like a good idea, especially for a 14-year-old girl. Corey decided it was time for his daughter to return to their rented home, but he couldn't let her go alone. No, he was going to ensure the girl's safety first, and then return for Yeon-soo, his wife. He trusted that everything was going to be all right, but he had no way of knowing for sure. It was November 24th, 2022. Corey Allen, his wife, Yeon-soo Kim, and their 14-year-old daughter were on vacation. They left their home in Flagstaff, Arizona, and were now staying in a rented house in Puerto Penasco, Mexico. Puerto Penasco, also known as Rocky Point in English, is a small city located 62 miles from the border with Arizona. Tourism and fishing are the main activities of the city. Tourists from all over come for its beaches and its pleasant resorts. There are also many available activities for those tourists who'd rather do something else than sunbathing. On that Thursday, Corey, Yeon-soo, and their daughter decided to go kayaking. It was meant to be a family outing, a chance to paddle along the peaceful waters off Playa Encanto. But the weather had other plans. The wind picked up that Thanksgiving afternoon, strong enough to whip the waves into a frenzy. Suddenly, maneuvering a kayak no longer seemed like an easy job. This wasn't the kind of weather amateurs can face. As the wind turned fierce, the tide turned with a force that made the shoreline recede. That's when Corey realized they were in danger. This wasn't the place for a teenager. He decided to take his daughter out of the water and back to their rented home. After leaving his 14-year-old where he knew she was safe, Corey returned to the beach for his wife, Yeon-soo Kim. They'd be back soon, and then they'd all be together again. But as the day grew longer, the couple's daughter became more and more concerned. Her parents had failed to return as promised. She raised the alarm later that afternoon, and a full-scale search began. Volunteers scoured the land, sea, and air for the missing couple. In the meantime, family members flew to Mexico to take care of the daughter. By Sunday, hope to find them alive somewhere was beginning to wane. That afternoon, a local fishing boat found a body some 8 miles off the coast near Mayan Palace. The Civil Protection and firefighters of Puerto Penasco released a statement saying that the features matched one of the missing persons. A member of the Allen family confirmed the heartbreaking news. It was Yeon-soo Kim. The search for Corey continued, but it was as if Corey had vanished into thin air. After a few days, the family called off the search. Corey's kayak was found southeast of Puerto Penasco, but there was no sign of the man. On March 3, 2023, Latavia Tay McGee and her 3 friends, all from South Carolina, crossed the Brownsville and Matamoros Express International Bridge. McGee, a 33-year-old mother of 6, was traveling to Matamoros for an abdominoplasty, a tummy tuck procedure. Accompanying her were close friends Eric James Williams, Shaid Woodard, and Zindel Brown. They had rented a white minivan for the trip. As they navigated the streets of Matamoros, they couldn't foresee the terror ahead. Around 11:45 a.m., their trip took a horrific turn. A car honked at their minivan, and Brown warned everyone not to stop, having seen a gun. Suddenly, gunmen opened fire on their vehicle. Williams later recounted the ordeal, describing how the gunman shot Brown and Woodard as they tried to flee. McGee was approached by a gunman with a small gun. In a desperate move, Williams exited the minivan but was shot in both legs. The attackers, believed to be part of the Gulf drug cartel, forced the 4 friends into a truck. A bystander captured footage of the violent abduction, which quickly went viral. During the ride, Woodard told his friends, "I love y'all, I'm gone." McGee, holding back tears, apologized to him. At their destination, the friends were forced out of the truck. Williams received inadequate medical treatment for his injuries. McGee was taken to another room with Brown, who, despite his grave condition, reassured her, "It's okay, I'm your brother, I'm supposed to be there for you. I love you." He died about an hour later. McGee saw one of the guards watching footage of their kidnapping. She asked to see it, and the guard showed her the video. McGee broke down, feeling hopeless and fearing that their families might never know what had happened to them. The captors moved McGee and Williams to another location, where they were held with other kidnapped individuals. A man claiming to be an American told them their kidnapping was a mistake. This man, who turned from captor to savior, fought with his boss to secure their release. He warned McGee and Williams that once he freed them, he would have to flee as well. He blindfolded them and loaded them into a vehicle, hiding Williams under the bodies of Brown and Woodard to evade detection. They drove for hours, switching vehicles to avoid authorities and the cartel. Finally, around 3 a.m., they stopped at a shack. It was here that Mexican authorities, acting on a tip, found McGee and Williams, along with the bodies of Brown and Woodard. The discovery of the two surviving Americans prompted a swift response from both Mexican and U.S. authorities. Days later, Mexican police found 5 men tied up in a truck near the intersection where the Americans had been taken. A note with the men indicated that the Scorpions faction of the Gulf Cartel wanted to hand over those responsible for the kidnapping. This move was likely an attempt to avoid further scrutiny from law enforcement. The group of friends from South Carolina had set out for a medical procedure, but found themselves in a deadly case of mistaken identity. Authorities believe the cartel mistook them for Haitian smugglers, a tragic error that cost 2 lives. Shaeed Woodard and Zindell Brown, lifelong friends of McGee and Williams, died in the ordeal. Their families were devastated. Woodard would have celebrated his 34th birthday just a week later. His father, James Woodard, expressed the pain of losing his son in such a brutal manner. McGee and Williams, the 2 survivors, are still healing from their physical and emotional wounds. The traumatic event left deep scars, but they are grateful to be alive. The kidnapping of the 4 Americans drew international attention to the violence and lawlessness that plague many parts of Mexico. Matamoros, in particular, is a city where cartels have significant control, leading to frequent violence, kidnappings, and extortion. The U.S. State Department had issued a Level 4 Do Not Travel advisory for the state of Tamaulipas, where Matamoros is located, citing these dangers. Despite the advisory, many Americans still travel to Mexico for affordable medical procedures. McGee herself had undergone surgery in Mexico 2 or 3 years prior without incident. This time, however, their trip ended in tragedy. The aftermath saw a rapid response from both Mexican and U.S. authorities. The FBI launched an investigation and offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to the safe return of the Americans and the arrest of those responsible. The White House and State Department condemned the abduction and killings, and some U.S. lawmakers even called for military action against the cartels. In Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador's Hugs Not Bullets policy, focusing on social programs rather than direct confrontation with criminal gangs, faced criticism. The swift response to the kidnapping of American citizens contrasted sharply with the often slow response to the thousands of Mexican nationals who go missing each year. The bodies of Shaeed Woodard and Zindell Brown were eventually returned to their families in the United States. McGee and Williams, after receiving medical treatment, were also brought back home. The friends and families of the victims are left to cope with the aftermath of this senseless violence, hoping for justice and some measure of peace. It was April 3, 2024, when Edmund Bradley Solomon III and his wife, Mimi, disembarked from the Royal Caribbean cruise ship, Icon of the Seas, at the bustling port of Cozumel, Mexico. The couple, in their mid-60s, had been enjoying a much-anticipated 7-day cruise, a final big vacation following Edmund's diagnosis with frontotemporal dementia. Edmund, known affectionately as Brad, had spent over 20 years as a critical care nurse at Ralph H. Johnson VA Medical Center in Charleston, South Carolina. He was now retired, and the diagnosis had significantly altered his behavior, though his memory remained mostly intact. Brad's wife, Mimi, also a nurse and a recent breast cancer survivor, had become his primary caregiver, navigating the challenges brought on by his condition. This cruise was meant to be a break from the routine, a chance to relax and enjoy each other's company. As they moved through the terminal, Brad and Mimi decided to take a quick restroom break before heading out to explore Cozumel. Mimi entered the women's restroom while Brad headed to the men's. Moments later, when Mimi emerged, Brad was nowhere to be seen. Initially, she assumed he was still inside and waited outside the restroom. But as the minutes ticked by, her concern grew. She asked a family member who had accompanied them to check the men's restroom, but Brad was not there. Panic set in. Mimi and the family member searched the immediate area but found no sign of Brad. Knowing his condition could cause him to act unpredictably, they feared the worst. Savannah Miller, Brad's daughter, later recounted the ordeal, explaining how the family knew immediately that Brad was lost. News of Brad's disappearance quickly spread among the cruise passengers and crew. The local authorities were notified and a search was initiated. Brad was last seen wearing a white t-shirt, gray shorts, dark sunglasses, and a blue hat. He also wore a GPS necklace, but it only worked within a 33-foot range of Mimi's phone, rendering it useless once he wandered out of range. Around 2:30 p.m., a taxi driver reported seeing a man who matched Brad's description on the road to Isla de la Pasión. The driver said the man flagged him down and requested a ride to a road with beach access. When he realized he had no money, Brad paid the fare with his wristwatch. This sighting provided a glimmer of hope and a critical clue about Brad's whereabouts. Back in the United States, Savannah, Brad's daughter, and other family members dropped everything to fly to Cozumel and join the search. They were desperate to find Brad, who was now lost in an unfamiliar place, vulnerable due to his dementia. The family reached out to the U.S. Embassy and Consulate in Mexico City, and a GoFundMe page was set up to aid in the search efforts. The fundraiser quickly surpassed its goal, raising over $15,000. In Cozumel, the search effort was massive and coordinated. Local police, the military, and volunteers scoured the island. Authorities used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, search dogs, and even an infrared camera in their efforts. The search spanned from city streets to jungles, beaches, and resorts. Civil protection vehicles broadcast messages from Mimi, pleading for any information on Brad's whereabouts. As the days passed, the search took a toll on the family's mental state. Savannah shared her anguish on social media, expressing her fear and exhaustion. She urged people to keep sharing their story to ensure it remained in the public eye. Despite the intensive search, promising leads turned into dead ends. Sightings of Brad were reported, but none were confirmed. The local community was supportive, with many joining the search efforts, but the frustration of false leads weighed heavily on the family. Brad's condition made the situation even more challenging. His frontotemporal dementia affected his behavior, making him act erratically and say odd things. He often walked quickly, head down, appearing confident despite being lost and scared. He was likely avoiding help, not knowing how to process the situation or respond to unfamiliar people. Days turned into weeks, and the search shifted from rescue to recovery. The number of searchers dwindled, but those who remained were dedicated. They combed through every possible location, including parks, abandoned buildings, and even Mayan ruins. Despite their efforts, Brad remained missing. It was March 15, 2018, when Kevin Sharp, his wife Amy, and their children Sterling and Adriana arrived in Cancun, Mexico. The Sharps, from Creston, Iowa, were excited for their trip to Tulum, a popular tourist spot on the Yucatan Peninsula. Kevin, 41, was known as the Sharpshooter for his expertise as a stock car racer at Adams County Speedway. He was a local champion, respected both on and off the track. Amy, 38, was known for her kindness and dedication to her family. Their children, Sterling, 12, and Adriana, 7, were bright and well-loved. The family started their trip on March 13th, driving to St. Louis, Missouri, where they stayed overnight. The next day, they flew to Cancun. From there, they rented a car and drove to Tulum, where they had rented a condo. Amy texted her mother at 7 p.m. on March 14th, confirming their safe arrival with, "We made it to our condo." Their vacation was meant to be a break from routine, filled with fun and family time. They planned to meet friends, explore local attractions, and visit a water park. But things took a dark turn when they suddenly stopped communicating. The last message from the Sharps was a text Kevin sent to his friend Travis Anderson, around 5 p.m. on March 15th. Travis replied at 11:30 p.m. but received no response. This silence was unusual, as the Sharps typically shared daily updates and photos during their trips. Concern grew among their friends and family in Iowa. By March 21st, the Sharps were supposed to return to the U.S., flying back to St. Louis and then heading to Danville, Illinois for a college basketball game. When they didn't arrive as planned, alarm bells rang. Their family in Iowa, sensing something was terribly wrong, reported them missing just after midnight on March 22nd. The situation escalated quickly. Friends and relatives took to social media to seek help and spread awareness. Ashley Peterson, a relative, posted on Facebook, urging anyone with information to come forward. The family's phones were pinged, showing they were still in Mexico, but with no movement. Mexican authorities and the U.S. State Department were contacted, launching an investigation. The State Department's advisory for travelers to Mexico highlighted an increase in violent crime, adding to the anxiety surrounding the Sharps' disappearance. Late on March 22nd, employees at the condo complex in Tulum noticed a strange odor coming from the Sharps unit. Concerned, they entered the condo and made a horrifying discovery. Kevin, Amy, Sterling, and Adriana were all found dead inside. There were no signs of foul play, leading to speculation about the cause of their deaths. The Creston Police Department and the U.S. State Department confirmed the tragic news. Autopsies in Mexico suggested gas asphyxiation from a faulty water heater as the cause of death. Such accidents, while rare, can happen with poorly maintained equipment. The small town of Creston was in shock. Kevin was remembered for his racing skills and community contributions. Amy's kindness and the children's vibrant personalities left a lasting impact on everyone who knew them. The Sharps case also raised questions about tourist safety in Mexico. The U.S. State Department's advisory for Quintana Roo, where Tulum is located, mentioned increased caution due to crime and a rise in homicide rates. While the Sharps' deaths were not linked to violence, the context added to the overall concern for American travelers. As news of their death spread, people from all over expressed condolences and support for the grieving family. The community came together to honor the memory of Kevin, Amy, Sterling, and Adriana, sharing stories of their kindness, achievements, and the joy they brought to those around them. 19-year-old Manuel Reyes and his friend, 36-year-old Jesus Jesse Ramon Corona, were last seen in Lagos de Morena, a city in Jalisco, Mexico, at around 10:30 p.m. on May 2, 2021. They were heading out for tacos on Orozco y Jimenez Boulevard, the main street in the heart of Lagos de Morena. Manuel had come to Mexico from his home in Hayward, California, in early April to visit his sister. He also intended to spend time with his grandmother, who had fallen ill. Sadly, she passed away during his visit. Manuel's sister, who prefers to remain anonymous, said that they were supposed to hang out that night. They had been exchanging messages on WhatsApp throughout the evening. At 4 a.m., her worry grew as Manuel still hadn't returned home. Both Manuel and Jesse's phones were turned off, and there was no way to contact them. The days following their disappearance were filled with anxiety and fear for Manuel's family. His mother, living back in Hayward, was distraught. The last time they spoke, Manuel had assured her that he would be home soon on Thursday. Those words now echoed painfully in her mind as she refused to enter his room, unable to face his belongings and the memories they held. Lagos de Morena is known for its alarming number of disappearances. Residents report that many young people, typically aged between 13 and 22, have gone missing in the area. This troubling pattern adds to the gravity of Manuel and Jesse's situation. Manuel was last seen wearing gray pants, a blue and gray sweatshirt, gray sneakers, and a red cap. Jesse was last seen in jeans, a pink Aeropostale shirt, and blue Nike sneakers. These details were shared with the hope that someone might have seen them or could provide clues about their whereabouts. The case gained widespread attention due to Manuel's status as an American citizen. U.S. authorities began pressing local Mexican police to intensify their search efforts. This added pressure was crucial in a region where disappearances are alarmingly common and often unsolved. Diana Delgadino, head of social communication in Tepatitlan, a city near Lagos de Morena, stated that when a person is reported missing, all alerts are activated. They communicate between municipalities to close the circles and comb the area for clues. This protocol was put into action for Manuel and Jesse, but so far it has yielded no results. The fear that Manuel and Jesse might have been abducted by a criminal group is a real concern for their families. Maria Guadalupe Contreras, a family member, believes that they were taken by armed men. Back in Hayward, Manuel's mother clings to hope while grappling with the pain of his absence. "That's why I don't want to enter his room at all other than pray. I don't want to see his clothes or anything like that because it reminds me of when he used to go out," she said. The emotional toll on the family is immense, and the uncertainty of Manuel's fate only deepens their pain. On March 11, 1989, at around 2:30 a.m., Mark James Kilroy, a senior at the University of Texas at Austin, was enjoying spring break with his high school friends Bill Huddleston and Bradley Moore from Texas A&M, and Brent Martin from Alvin Community College. They decided to spend their break at South Padre Island, a popular spot for college students. Traveling in Martin's car, they looked forward to a week of fun. The next day, they visited Matamoros, Mexico, a town known for its nightlife and cheap drinks. They spent the night bar-hopping along Calle Alvaro Obregón, mingling with other students and partying into the early morning. The following day, they returned to Matamoros, leaving their car on the American side and walking into town. That evening, Kilroy separated from the group to talk to a woman he knew. Later, when it was time to return, Kilroy rejoined his friends, and they began their walk back to the car. On the way, the group stopped for a restroom break. Huddleston noticed a Hispanic man with a scar signaling to Kilroy and heard Kilroy say something like, "Didn't I just see you somewhere?" Huddleston thought Kilroy knew the man. When Huddleston rejoined Martin and Moore, Kilroy was missing. They assumed he had caught a ride back to the hotel. The next morning, Kilroy had not returned. Worried, his friends contacted the police and reported him missing. Initially, the police thought Kilroy was just another student who got drunk and lost. As time passed and Kilroy didn't turn up in hospitals or jails, they suspected foul play. Mark's parents, James and Helen Kilroy, flew to Brownsville to search for their son. They distributed over 20,000 leaflets and offered a $15,000 reward for information and met with Texas officials. On March 26th, America's Most Wanted featured the case, generating many tips but no solid leads. The Kilroys returned home without answers. Soon after, the U.S. and Mexico launched a large anti-drug operation along the border, involving 1,200 agents, helicopters, and planes. In early April, Elio Hernandez Rivera, a 22-year-old Matamoros resident, was arrested at a police roadblock for possessing marijuana. During questioning, Rivera identified several drug dealers and mentioned his family's ranch, Santa Elena, about 20 miles from Matamoros. The police decided to investigate. On April 11th, Comandante Juan Benitez Ayala of the Mexican Federal Police led a group to the Santa Elena ranch. They found 75 pounds of marijuana. When shown a photo of Kilroy, the ranch caretaker recognized him and pointed to a nearby shack. The officers approached the shack and were overwhelmed by the smell of rotting flesh. Inside, they found 12 shallow graves with dismembered bodies, including Mark Kilroy. The bodies were mutilated in various ways, some slashed, others shot, burned, or hanged. 3 more bodies were found later, totaling 15. Inside the shack, police discovered a gruesome scene. Blood covered the floors, and there was an iron kettle filled with spikes, a charred human brain, and a roasted turtle. Urns contained solidified blood, human hair, and animal parts. A large oil drum seemed to have been used to boil the victims, described as a human slaughterhouse. Rivera confessed that the victims were sacrificed in rituals. The cult believed human sacrifice made them invincible and protected their drug operations from the police. Rivera and the other suspects showed no remorse. They said Kilroy was chosen because cult leader Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo ordered the sacrifice of an Anglo student. Kilroy nearly escaped but was recaptured and taken to the ranch, where he was bound, gagged, and imprisoned in the shack. The suspects claimed they fed him and told him he wouldn't be harmed. 12 hours later, Constanzo executed Kilroy by chopping him in the neck with a machete. His body was later found with legs severed at the knees, and his brain and spine removed. The discovery of Kilroy's body and the mass grave caused a media frenzy and highlighted concerns already discussed in the Texas legislature. On May 3, 1989, the Houston Chronicle warned of rising ritualistic crimes in Texas. This led to Senate Bill 30, introduced by Senator Judith Zaffirini, which increased penalties for crimes involving rituals. The bill passed on August 14, 1989, but was repealed 4 years later due to a lack of prosecutions under it. The search for Constanzo and his accomplice, Sara Aldrete, intensified. 2 weeks after finding the mass grave, Mexican police burned the shack and placed a cross over the area. 2 weeks later, they found Constanzo in an apartment. As the police closed in, Constanzo threw money out a window and fired his gun. He then ordered his partner, Alvaro de Leon Valdez, to shoot him and his companion, Martin Quintana Rodriguez. When police stormed the apartment, they found black candles, 2 swords, a wax skull, and a blindfolded doll. Constanzo and Quintana were found dead, having been shot by Valdez. De Leon Valdez, Aldrete, and 3 other cult members were charged with homicide and other crimes. After this horrific case, James and Helen Kilroy established a nonprofit anti-drug foundation in Mark's name, focusing on scholarships, youth interventions, and summer programs. "We put our energy into the fight against drugs," James Kilroy said. "We try to look forward, not back."